Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Montreal Forum. I'm your host, Liam Maguire, and we've got lots for you on the show today. Of course, a little later on, I'll be recapping that very spicy exhibition game between Montreal and Ottawa. But as this show is relatively new and we're bringing on some guests here in this very fledgling start of our new production, it does come to light that we're entering the time of year where the new books that are coming on the market are going to be plentiful. And this is no exception. And this is 100% on the Montreal Canadiens. So nothing can fit better than to get Brendan Kelly on right now to discuss his new writing, The Habs Nation, A People's History of the Montreal Canadiens. And there it is. Grant's putting it up on the screen, Brendan. I hope you can see that as well. So
I did see it. Absolutely. Fantastic. Thanks
welcome.
for the invitation, Liam and Grant. Super happy to be here to talk about my book.
Yeah, so you sent it to me. I just returned a couple days ago from working out east for 5 days with, among others, Chris Nyland and Guy Carbonneau, who were both out
Fantastic.
there. Yeah, they're part of this Legends hockey group that I do a lot of work for through the winter. And there are others as well that played for Montreal: Stéphane Richer, Sergio Momesso, Lucien Deblois. We've got a pretty good stable of former Habs that are part of a group of alumni. So that fits the ball well. But this book of yours, as I said, I'm prefacing that by saying I've read about 3 or 4 chapters of it so far. So I only really have a smattering of interest. So let me start with this question, Brendan: is A People's History of the Montreal Canadiens, but you have an angle, right? You have a slant of French Canadian angle slant to this, correct? If I may be saying that wrong.
Well, I mean, here's what it is, Liam. It's and there's a couple of dogs in the background there. There's life,
Yeah,
but
I got him here too.
life goes on. But it's really, I always say it's not a book about hockey. It's a book about the Montreal Canadiens, and anyone who knows the Canadiens knows this, is their deep ties to the province of Quebec. So French does play a big role in it because there are more French people here than there are English people. And of course, the whole identity of the Canadiens too, Les Canadiens de Montréal, they were created specifically for the French community. So it's really about the ties that bind the team to Quebec. But I got to say, I mean, this is the English book coming out right now. I actually wrote the book in French last year. And for the English book, I thought, okay, it is really the relationship to the province of Quebec and talking about icons like Maurice Richard and Jean Béliveau and Patrick Roy and Guy Lafleur. But I thought, if we're going to do it in English, we got to have a new chapter, and I added a chapter called Trumping the Two Solitudes. And it's really about the relationship between the team and English Montreal, and how, in a way, English and French Montrealers see the team differently. And it's interesting, you were talking about being out with Chris Nyland and Sergio Momesso. Well, Sergio was one of the great interviews for that chapter, because that was really great to talk to Sergio as a kid from NDG, an Italian Montrealer, and what it was like for him to join the Canadiens in the 80s. So it's really about the relationship between the team in Quebec and French and English, but French identity is a big part of it. And I know English people sometimes, enough of that garbage, but it is part of what the team is. I mean, look at what just happened with that that Nick Suzuki interview, right? Where he did an interview in French, first ever interview in French. It was a huge deal. Like, they really care about it. The people who run the Canadiens care about it, and their French fans care about it. I mean, it is a thing, right? I mean, it's not, I'm not making this thing up,
No, I totally agree, and I have firsthand experience at that. And with that, I'm much like yourself, have an Irish name. My
Yeah.
mother, my late father was from Dublin, Ireland. My mother is French Canadian. I was born in Montreal, but I don't speak French. I moved out too young. I never got it. I never studied it enough to learn it. However, events that I've worked at over my 44-year career, many times in the Montreal area with Montreal alumni, I would try and read a section or a paragraph or something that I was doing that night in French, and the response to me, even with my English French accent, the response was, "Thank you so much, even just for trying to speak our language," much like Nick Suzuki just did.
No, absolutely. And there's a whole bunch of interesting things you said there, Liam. Firstly, we're both of Irish heritage. I mean, I was born in Glasgow, but my family on both sides, 100%, 110% Irish. And there's always been a deep connection between Irish and French Canadians. You talk about your parents, one's Irish, one's French Canadian. How many people are there in Quebec who have that heritage? Claude Ryan, the singer Pierre Flynn, Julie Snyder, the TV host. I go around, and because of my name, and I'm a journalist with the Gazette, and I meet a lot of francophones, and they're like, there is those ties between the two, and there is something. Look at, as I say, people that you hit the nail on the head. People cared so much when Nick Suzuki did that thing in French, and obviously it was rehearsed, and he's not fluent. But that means so much to people. It's a bit like when rock stars come here, Peter Gabriel and Sting and Supertramp, and they speak a bit of French. It means a lot, and I get it, because it means you're respecting the culture, and we should respect the culture, right? I mean, I'm not saying, like, stand up for English rights too. Don't get me wrong. I mean, and I'm not like saying I like Francois Legault. I don't like Bill 96. I don't like people stepping on our community. But it's another thing to say we respect the French, and I think the Canadiens have such a central role in that. I mean, they're like, think about it, Liam. What represents Quebec more than the Montreal Canadiens? I mean, there's nothing. I mean, it's not even a debate. I mean, it's they are the symbol of Quebec for both French and English people. But there is something about that history, and that's what the book is about. It makes a parallel, and I think it's something new that we haven't seen before. It makes a parallel between the history of the Montreal Canadiens and the history of Quebec. And I mean, like, one of the most famous incidents, and everyone knows this, is the Maurice Richard riot, 1955. It was a riot about hockey, about Maurice Richard being suspended, right, for the rest of the season in the playoffs. Greatest player in hockey at the time, one of the greatest ever Montreal Canadiens. But it was about more than that too, right? I mean, it was political. It was French people here saying, you know what, c'est assez, it's enough. Your league is run by Clarence Campbell, and it's English people, and we're taking our own power. And that led to, it was a key event. Now, when we look back at it, people say that was a key event in what we call the Quiet Revolution, right? In the 60s, when French Quebec said, you know what, we're going to, we were kind of oppressed by the church, oppressed by the English. We're going to take our place. And I don't think, I'm a long-time English Montrealer. I think we agree with that. It's like, like, French has to be protected. We don't need to step on the English, as I said. But it's like, and that whole thing happened. And, there's a whole Francophone business world that never existed, what we call Quebec Inc. And the Canadien was part of that. And again, in the book, I talk about how in the 1970s, right? Like the team, they used to say is the Flying Frenchman, right? And it's and of course it was great French players like Jacques Lemaire and Mario Tremblay and Guy Lafleur and Serge Savard and all of these people. But it was also, of course, great English Canadian players like Ken Dryden and Bob Gainey and Larry Robinson. But what I say in the book is you can see this parallel. The 70s was an incredibly exciting time here. There was this exploding culture. Michel Tremblay was writing plays in Joao, the language of the streets. Danny Arcand was making great movies. Beau Dommage were making great records. The Parti Québécois was bringing this new nationalist vision. And the two things were in absolute parallel. And then in 1980, what happens in hockey is the end of that great dynasty, right? So in 1980, and I have a great thing. You mentioned Chris Nyland. There's a great interview, and Chris talks about joining the team in 79, 80, and they go into the playoffs, and they've just won 4 straight Stanley Cups. And Chris is like, hey, this is great. I'm going to be first year, and I'm going to win another cup. Obviously, they win the cup every year, and boom. And it was like a shock, right? They lost to the Minnesota North Stars, and boom, that was it. It was over. Then you go to the draft that year. They had the number one choice, which is vintage Sam Pollock, right? They're the best team in hockey, and they still got the number one choice because of trades. And they really basically have a choice between two players. Doug Wickenheiser, the big center from out west, highly touted. Probably most people in hockey would say he was the guy you go for. But then there's another guy, Denny Savard, little guy, French Canadian, playing for the Verdun Canadiens, playing right down the street at the Verdun Auditorium. They famously, infamously, you might say, pick Wickenheiser. And I mean, it's a sad story. It just doesn't work out. I mean, we all know drafting, Grant's an expert on the draft. We know that like draftings, sometimes you make the wrong choice, and that was the wrong choice. And Denny Savard turned into a superstar with the Chicago Blackhawks. Of course, he ended up with the Canadiens later on. But the point is that entered a really tough period for the Canadiens, right? They still win a cup in 86, but the 80s are a difficult time for the team. At the same time, in 1980, again, to make the parallel with society, what happens in 1980 in Quebec is the first referendum, huge defeat for the yes side, for the nationalists. And it really becomes a dark period for Quebec. The 80s was not a great time here. I remember it was like, the nationalists were all depressed. The economy was not doing great. The Parti Québécois was like this, suddenly René Lévesque was persona non grata. So there's this thing that happens where there's these parallels between the society and the team. When, like, my view, and it's, I guess it's open to debate, but I think I'm right. 1995 is the year it all falls apart. And then I think most people would agree. Serge Savard, the last, great general manager, we'll see with the current team, managers, but he's the last guy to win 2 Stanley Cups as general manager in 86 and 93. He gets fired 4 games into the 1995 season. One of the most insane decisions in the history of the NHL. I mean, what is that? Firing a GM and a coach after 4 games? If they were not the guys for the job, fire them during the summer. I mean, come on, it was ridiculous. And then that leads directly to the trade of Patrick Roy. And again, Serge Savard said to me, I interviewed Serge Savard for the book. He says, I was trying to trade Patrick Roy. We all know that. He was already thinking about trading Patrick Roy, but he was going to get something. I think he was looking at Owen Nolan from Quebec and Colorado. And it's like, you give him away for nothing. And honestly, it took 25 years for the team to recover from what happened in the fall of 1995. We're just coming out of that now, if you ask me. At the same time, what else happened in the fall of 1995 in the world, the real world off the hockey rink, was the second referendum, which again was a probably even more bitter defeat for the nationalists because it was almost a tie game, to use a hockey metaphor. It was virtually 50-50. And that ended separatism right then and there for the moment. I mean, it could come back now, but for 25 years, it was like, we're not going to have another referendum. And so to me, Liam, that's like kind of crazy. I when I started looking at this stuff, it's like the two things are working in this kind of symbiotic way. And it's a thing, like it really is. Like the Canadiens are part, like to me, it's kind of like the Canadiens impact the society. They're so important in Quebec, as you know, and they're important all across Canada. But also society impacts them, like they're aware of this and they're aware. And Jeff Molson, who's the current owner, and the managers, they understand that it's not just a hockey team. They understand that there's something bigger going on here.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. Sorry, I kind of I get a little wrapped up in this, Liam.
It's all good. Grant and I, we laugh about how much we love to get on and espouse our views on the Habs, on mostly hockey stuff. Obviously, you go down some different paths, but like the Richard riot was 70 years ago. You speak of it from a historical context. That totally makes sense. Everybody gets that. And anybody who's delved into that at all, I think there's definitely some credence to old English Clarence Campbell, French Canadian superstar Rocket Richard. They had been at loggerheads for several years, and it culminated with that suspension, which was totally the right thing to do based on Rocket's antics on March 13th against Bruins.
100%.
And the rest is history. Certainly the riot and how it's been portrayed politically is another story. But So you're writing about it just from a historical context, right? Like there's no correlation to the riot and the Montreal Canadiens of the 50s, not to my opinion or knowledge.
No, I mean, and it's interesting because one of the people, like in the book, I talked to hockey players, right? Like ex Habs and some of the greats like Serge Savard and Denny Savard and Chris Nyland and Pierre Turgeon. But I also talked to politicians and I talked to academics. And one of the academics I talked to who's written a PhD thesis on the social history of the Canadiens, Philip Antoine Lupien, and he says, like, you're quite right that when the riot happened, it was just a riot about Rocket Richard and people being mad about him being suspended. It's when it comes later with journalists and historians and they say this was a moment for Quebec, I mean, listen, personally, I think that was part of the story, but there's a hockey story too, obviously. I mean, what happened after that riot? So by suspending Richard, they basically meant they wouldn't win the cup, right? So they lost their greatest player. They came back, and of course, what they did, and that's Maurice Richard, right? It's like, okay, you're going to suspend me. Watch this, and they won 5 straight Stanley Cups. I mean, it wasn't just him. So there's a hockey story and there's a social story, but you know what? Yeah, my view is you can't divorce the two, and that's what I'm looking at in the book. And there are many other books about the Canadiens that are just histories of what happened on the ice. This is about on the ice and off the ice, and those are the stories that interest me. I mean, like I'm fascinated by talking to Bob Gainey, and talking to him about what it was like to come to that team in the 1970s. And so here you've got this kid from Peterborough, Ontario, and he comes here and he's like, it's this dressing room, which is no longer the case, but then it was very French and very English, right? But he was great friends with Mario Tremblay, and Serge Savard, like Serge comes from Abitibi, right? He comes from a place, he told me he never saw an English person until he came to Montreal. I mean, it was a very, very all Francophone world. And who was his best friend on the team was John Ferguson. And he tells a hilarious story of how Régent Tremblay, who was a very influential Habs writer, and at the time he was writing for La Presse, and a real nationalist, and Régent's like, hey, how come you're friends with John Ferguson? And Serge, like, quite rightfully says, hey, he's my friend. I mean, I love the guy, and was a lifelong friend of Serge Savard's. But I'm fascinated by those stories, and I'm also fascinated by the idea of community, like Bob Gainey says, he was living in Westmount at the time and he's playing for the Habs. He used to take the 24. He took the bus down. Sometimes he'd take the bus down to the practice. Like, you're not seeing Cole Caulfield and Uri Slavkovsky taking the metro to games. And they would go to the Forum and they do their practice, and then they go over. There was a famous tavern at Alexis Neon Plaza, Le Carbonier, and they'd go over and have a couple of beers, and if people saw them, they saw them, and they were more in the community. And I think that's also part of the story. It was like they were more rooted in Quebec, but it's partly a story about sports, right? I mean, it's like we're in a different world now, right? These guys are making, 10, 11 million dollars or whatever. Now Kaprizov this week, 17. I mean, it's like back then, I don't know, how much was Bob Gainey making? I'm just guessing like 60, 70.
Yeah, probably right. Ken Dryden was a contract holdout at $60,000 in 1974 when he
yeah.
So.
Like, imagine that, Liam, $60,000, and the guy's the greatest goalie in hockey at the time, and actually one of the greatest goalies in the history of hockey. I think most people would agree. And it was a different world. So, they can't be in the community as much. But anyways, I mean, that's kind of the focus of my book. The book is as much that social history. I mean, obviously we talk about hockey, but I mean, like, for example, another important guy in the book is Carl Subban. So I had a great meeting with him. I went up to Toronto and met with him, PK Subban's dad. And to me, PK Subban is a major player for that era of the Habs. Now, he's not one of the greatest players in the history of hockey, but there was a sense of excitement with this guy. There was an electricity that he brought to the rink, but also brought to the community. A friend of mine said the other day, like 2 weeks ago, they saw PK Sunday morning in Old Montreal. I mean, the guy didn't even play his whole career here. He's from Toronto. He lives in New York. He works for ESPN. He still comes back to Montreal because he established roots here. And to me, that's interesting. And I would say that I think it's positive that we're seeing perhaps something like that coming back to the Habs. Look, Nick Suzuki spent the whole year here. He spent the whole summer here. There were a bunch of guys there skating at Brossard every day. They're now starting to live in the Old Port. They were always living in the South Shore, which sort of had them out of the community. So I think it's coming back. But listen, I mean, that's my focus in the book. I mean, it's just me. I'm
Yeah.
interested by those stories. It's like my background is, I do the What the Puck column in the Gazette, but I'm an arts reporter, and so to me, I'm looking at it from a different point of view.
Yeah, no, I get that. You're watching the Montreal Forum here with Liam Maguire. We're joined by Brendan Kelly, who's just written Habs Nation, a people's history of the Montreal Canadiens. And like I said, I perused through some of the chapters. And by the way, you'll never get a better example of the two solitudes than the punchline with Elmer Locke from Saskatchewan, Rocket Richard from Montreal, and Toe Blake from Victoria Mines, Ontario, right on the border of Ontario and Quebec, and had to translate between the two of them, right? I mean, that's probably one of the best examples of French English on the Montreal Canadiens, which was somewhat demonstrated in the movie On the Rocket, if you recall.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's like, and which I think is a great movie, and there's a lot in there. And you see for example, also the relationship between the Rocket and Dick Irvin Sr., who's the coach, and he's kind of riling him up to get him angry. But even when the team was at its most French from like 55 to the early 90s, it's always about the two, like you said, like the punchline. 2 out of the 3 are English Canadians. And you think of those great teams of the 70s, like I was saying, there's really a mix. Even 1993, think about it. That team was, the last team to win the Cup, last Canadiens team. 14 of the players are Quebecois, right? So that's like, and that was explicit, right? Like Savard really believed the more Quebec players you got, they play harder. And he was right. They won the Cup. But there were great English players on that team too. Like, I mean, obviously Kirk Muller, Brian Bellows, Lyle Odeline. Those guys were as important. It's not to be like a cartoon vision. You just get French guys and everything's okay. But it's kind of nice to see the two working together. Like you're saying, like the punchline, like French and English working together. This is a great idea. We should see more of that.
Listen, 15 years before the punchline, the Montreal Canadiens' first ever great line was Howie Morenz and Aurore Joliette and Billy Boucher. Billy Boucher was from Ottawa. Morenz was from Stratford. So,
right.
Joliette's from the area here too. He was bilingual, but you didn't have French Canadians. But, splitting hairs there, you kind of pick it up from the Rocket on. I get that, even though the Habs won cups before 1944. But
not as many, though. Not as many, right? Like, that's one of the things that comes out in the book, too, is they won 17 of their 24 cups between 1955 and 1995, which was the era when the team was at its most French Canadian. So prior to 55, not the best team in hockey. After 95, very much not the best team in hockey. And I think that's a part of the Canadiens' history. We always just say they're the greatest team ever, and they are. Yeah. But the greatest period was that period. I mean, it's not, I don't think it's really up for debate, right?
No, it's not, except that, again, if you up until 1967, Montreal and Toronto were tied in Stanley Cups. So the Leafs were every bit. They just didn't win 5 in a row, but they won 3 in a row. Nobody had done that. Montreal hadn't done it until the 50s. So, like the Leafs in the 40s were way more dominant than the Montreal Canadiens. So
no, that's it. And that's one of the things. One of the guys I talked to is Denny Arcand, the great Oscar-winning filmmaker. He's 84, right? So he grew up with those teams, and he's like, yeah, they weren't that good. I mean, it's like, it wasn't like they weren't that dominant team until the Rocket came into his prime, right? I mean, one of the great stories that's told there is Dick Irvin Jr. talks about, the situation in the early 40s when the team was doing terrible. And they said, we're closing up the team. And Conn Smythe says, you can't do that. I need the Montreal Canadiens as the rival. It's like a Marvel Comics movie. And he told Dick Irvin Sr., which I love that story, right? He says to him, you know what, Dick? And he was the coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs, of course. He said, you got to go to Montreal. I'm firing you and sending you to Montreal, which, I mean, you couldn't imagine that
No.
happening today. And he goes to Montreal, and Dick Irvin Jr. tells the story of how, the owners come and they say, this guy, Maurice Richard, he's not really doing well. This is the early 40s. Remember, he broke his leg. He was like having,
Oh, yeah, they tried to trade him.
right. They tried to trade him, and Dick Irvin Sr. said, do not do that. So they didn't. And his son tells the story. They were burying him in Toronto, and at the cemetery, Conn Smythe, then 6 Toronto Maple Leafs were the pallbearers from the Stanley Cup winning team with Dick Irvin Sr. And Conn Smythe yelled at Dick as he was leaving, Dick Irvin Jr., and said, Dick. And Dick comes back and he says, don't you ever forget your father saved hockey in Montreal. Like, what a great story, no?
That is a great story. Dick Irvin Jr. is a very, very close personal friend and has been for a long time. And listen, the interviews that I've read, that I have perused, you've got definitely all the right characters in place. Let me just ask you a couple more, Brendan. I
Sure.
don't want to take up all your day.
Yeah,
but
no worries, much as you want.
you're not like in 1980, the Wickenheiser over Savard draft, and I lived right through that. And I was at that home opener. I was at the Montreal Forum 344 times in 21 years. I'm the only man. I'm the only man, by the way. That building was open for NHL hockey for 71 years, 3 months, and 17 days from 1924 to 1996. I'm the only guy to propose at center ice. The only guy.
Oh my God! Congratulations! I did not know that. That is fantastic.
That's like, I'm hardcore, right through the bone, Montreal Canadian, and that's why we're doing this with Grant and Habscast and everything else. But in 1980, the Irving Grundman Claude Ruel combination would have destroyed Denny Savard, just like they did Wickenheiser. 100%.
No, you know what, you're totally right, and I mean, imagine this, Liam. So you said you were there, Denny Savard's first game at the Forum, and they don't dress Wickenheiser. You just kind of destroy the. Imagine being Doug Wickenheiser, no?
Yeah.
And of course Savard scores. But what Denny Savard said to us, and he is such a great guy to talk to. What a wonderful human being. And he said, for the first thing he said, and he's a Quebecois guy. He ended his career with the Habs, and he tells the story of how Serge Savard said to him, like, he was not the same player, right? When he got to the Habs, he was declining. But Serge Savard said, "You won't score as many goals, but you're going to win the Stanley Cup." And guess what? He won the Stanley Cup with the Habs. But he said to me, and I thought that was cool. He said, listen, he said, I'm a Chicago Blackhawk.
Yeah.
I'm not going to play to the Montreal audience and say I'm a Canadien. They picked me. I was a superstar. They let me play. And you know what? You make a great point, because when he joined Chicago, it was the end of an era. They were kind of rebuilding, right? It was like those great teams of the 70s were fading. And so he got all the ice time, whereas Montreal, you're right. They had that approach that kind of crush the young guys, don't play them much, bring them up super slow. And that would not have helped Denny Savard. And he tells a great story about meeting with the Canadiens. You know how they meet them prior to the draft. And he was with his dad. And they got out of the meeting, and his dad turned to him and he said, "They're not picking you." He said, "They're not picking you." So you know what? It worked out. It worked out great for him. He became a superstar in Chicago. He's still associated, as you know, he's an ambassador for the team. And he came here and won a cup in his hometown, So, I mean, it's a pretty sweet story.
And it was phenomenal. He actually was averaging almost a point a game those 2.5 years, almost 3 seasons in Montreal. And he was an integral part, which is why Guy Carbonneau handed him the cup in 93. Even though he had broke his foot and he couldn't dress, he would have been able to go in that last game. You probably know this story. And he went to Jacques Demers and said, "Play Sylvain Lefebvre. Keep him in the lineup, and I'll sit out. You guys are on the verge of winning the cup. I'm getting my name on it. We win tonight. We all walk together." The old Fred Shiro quote from 74, and the rest is history. But let's just finish up on this, Brendan, because where we are today, I've stated already, I do a lot of interviews myself, and I've stated that this is the most excitement I can recall around the Montreal Canadiens notwithstanding the COVID run there in 2021, which was unbelievable. I took my son down to Montreal. We spent the day down there. Game 3 was unbelievable. The atmosphere, different than the 70s. I was there all those days too. But this excitement right now is predicated on what we're seeing on the ice. Like I saw a little bit from you in one of your final chapters where you mentioned, let's see Nick Suzuki or Cole Caulfield or Slavkovsky maybe try some French to
Right.
keep that umbilical cord or that unite that fan base still with the French culture, if you will, just a little bit, even though it'll never be what it was, right, Brendan? Those days are
It
gone.
won't. It won't. You know what? Think about it. You know, I was talking to someone the other day, and they sort of roughly the same age group as me, and they grew up in the late 60s, 70s watching the team. The guy said, I had 8 Stanley Cups, like as I went through grade school and high school. This will not happen again. But I'm with you, Liam. I wrote What the Puck a couple of weeks ago. I think there's more excitement about this team, and and it's not even up for debate. There's more excitement about this team than any team since the mid '90s. I mean, it really is. What other year? And the thing about it is, unlike 21, 21 was magic, and it was an incredible moment, but it was a bit of a freak of nature. This thing is built solidly by this management team. You've got a solid core: Suzuki, Slavkovsky, Caulfield, Lane Hudson. Lane Hudson's probably the biggest superstar we'll see, but looks like going to be the biggest star since the 70s and 80s. And Demidov looks, with a short runway of games so far, but looks amazing. Even the Goulets, and there's a solid core there. They're well managed. They're well coached. You never know. Like, I'm not saying I don't even know if they'll make the playoffs. I think they will, but yeah, I think there's something there. And people, like, I'm sure you feel this too. Habs fans are pumped. Like, they're waiting for that opening night, and they're expecting big things. I mean, these journalists who say, "Oh, it's okay to get a step backward," no, you need to step forward, and I think they will.
Art, I'm assuming then you're in the camp that the coach and or somebody in management, minimally somebody, has to be bilingual or has to be able to speak French. Are you of that?
Yes, 100%. I mean, listen. I mean, and again, I know there are English people who say, yeah, it doesn't matter, and I get that. Like in the era when we brought back Michel Therrien and we brought back Claude Julien, it was kind of like there just weren't enough coaches who speak French. That is an issue. But you know what? Martin St. Louis has to come out every night after the game and do a press scrum, which is mostly in French and is broadcast live on RDS, right? And is on all the radio stations. You need to have that. Like, you need to have someone to do that. And I mean, I think what's interesting is you have an owner, Jeff Molson, who's an Anglophone, fluently bilingual. Like, in this current team, not only does the coach have to speak French, the general manager has to speak French, right? They've got an English guy in Kent Hughes from Montreal, but he speaks fluent French, I mean, with a big English accent. So I think for the coach, I mean, do you disagree? I mean, it's not just coaching hockey. I mean, it's like he's got to do that. The media is part of the story,
It is. I've seen the trend too, right? I lived through the referendums. I wasn't there voting. I didn't live in the province, but I'm 66 years old, so I grew up when that was very, very prevalent. Believe me, in our house, my mom's from Quebec City, so she was glued to the TV. She had all sorts of relatives still living in the Montreal and Quebec City area at that time. Many have now passed, but I mean, at that time, that was huge in our household, following all of that. So I followed all that along. I never. It's in the last, I would say in the 2000s, because when Montreal was regurgitating some coaches and maybe some others might have been a better choice and just couldn't because they didn't speak the language. Yeah, I was going, maybe it's time for the Montreal Canadiens to be able to get to the next level. We can't just have a coach handcuffed by the language. Let's get the best guy available. And my sense is, from the media that I was doing in those days, that the majority of Montreal fans, in my opinion, were of that same thought. Now, here we are with Marty St. Louis with a burgeoning, exciting young team, and who knows where the ceiling is with these guys. But it's highly unlikely he'll be the coach if and when they make a Stanley Cup final.
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, every coach gets fired, right? I mean,
Yeah.
every coach
Or
leaves or
quits.
gets fired, and
Or
so it
quits
will
like Pat
happen.
Burns did. Pat Burns quit in Montreal. Like he wasn't fired. He walked out and said, I had enough.
Right, and you can understand that. I mean, it's intense here, and so there will be another coach. And you know what? They caught lightning in a bottle in a way with Martin St. Louis, right? A lot of people are like,
Yeah.
what the hell are they doing? And the guy's only coached Pee Wee. He hasn't even coached junior hockey, but
Yeah.
obviously it's worked out. He was a finalist for Coach of the Year.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
He's Mr. Right now. There's no doubt about it.
but we'll see what happens, and say in the post Martin St. Louis, yeah, like they're still not like go around the league. There's not 10 French language coaches out there, you know.
No. Well, and again, too, even Grant and I, before our interview today, Brendan, we were going back and forth on email and looking at statistics, just population base and lesser number of French players, even in hockey, let alone the NHL. Right, their numbers have dwindled substantially, and still 42% of the league is Canadian, but you have a much smaller window of French Canadian players who are elite, like you did 50 years ago.
And that's a huge story, right? And it's not one that's covered enough. It's like, okay, like I always say, like, so in 93, 14 of the players were Quebec players. You could not do that today. You'd be the last place team. And I'm not, but it's like something's happened with Quebec hockey. It's not kept up with Alberta. It's not kept up with the West, and it's not kept up with Ontario. And people running hockey here have to look long and hard at this. And I interviewed Jocelyn Thibault, and he was at the time head of Hockey Quebec, and he quit because he was so frustrated. There's a big problem, it's why, or where's the Mario Lemieux, where's the Guy Lafleur's, even they're not even got the goalies like they used to. It's
things are somewhat cycle over, cyclical, but in this case here, because it was so dominant, much like the Habs were but every dog has their day. I mean, ask Oilers.
Yeah.
Look at them in the 1980s. Look at the New York Islanders, and they don't make the playoffs for a million years. Like it's I don't think there's any decree that necessarily says you're going to have. I mean, in a perfect world, it would be great if you could have the management and the coaching and be able to get the players to come up and just win indefinitely, or certainly steady enough that you never have a downsize. But I always use the analogy of the double Ferris wheel, where you wanted to be when it's your time to go down. You want to make sure you're still that top one and not going all the way down to the very bottom. Although all the way down to the very bottom may give you an opportunity to draft a Guy Lafleur, even though they stealthily got the pick from the Seals. We all know the history and everything. But listen, Brendan, the whole thing's been great. I will read through your entire copy that you graciously sent over. I'll try and pick one up as well and support the cause. I'm an author.
Excellent.
Myself.
Appreciate it.
I've written 4 books, and I know the process. So kudos to you for delving into this. I see the personal flavor of it all, and I may not be in full agreement with all of it, but that's the best. That's the beauty of dissecting these things and putting it out there, and then letting people make their own minds up and discuss amongst themselves, right? Or with you if they get the chance to, like I just did. So I thank you for it.
And you know what, Liam? I mean, I'm a contrarian. That's what I am in life and in my columns. But you know what? We can talk about it. And we don't need to beat each other over the heads. And we have a disagreement. It's called democracy. It's called freedom of speech. I mean, it still exists in Canada.
Thank God. We'll leave the beating over the heads to Saturday night, Montreal and Ottawa.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, Brendan, listen, best of luck with the book. Folks, it's called Habs Nation, A People's History of the Montreal Canadiens. I love the title. And I saw, finish on this note, Brendan, how you started to talk there. You talk to so many people who, when they talk about being a Hab fan, and some getting emotional even, and everything, I shared with you a small window of my own personal life and into the fandom that I've been. I was on the phone last night with Yvan Cournoyer. He also was a very dear friend of mine. Ironically, I grew up idolizing him. He's my favorite player of all time. Wow. He'll be a guest on the Montreal Forum next week. So
fantastic.
We'll be talking to Yvan. So I'm intrinsically and absolutely metaphorically and every other possible nuance affiliated, associated in spirit with the Montreal Canadiens. So thanks for your effort here. I appreciate you coming on the Montreal Forum, and hopefully we can cross paths personally sometime and maybe discuss further.
That'd be amazing. If you're ever in Montreal, give me a buzz, Liam. Love to have a drink together.
All right, Brendan, I'll take you up on that. Thank you again for guesting today. Grant, you want me to roll on here, or would you like to jump on?
Hey, Liam.
G'day.
I've never seen somebody out talk you before. That was
well, you know, it was his turn.
Oh, for sure.
And I only probably tried to sort of intercede there the last 7 or 8 minutes just to get in, because there's a couple of things I wanted just to go over with him. I don't want. Listen, you can have an opinion that Denny Savard going first in 1980 changes Montreal's destiny. That's hogwash with Grundman and Claude Ruel running that show at that time. You know that. I know that. So, but that said, you know, like I said, I've now read over 4, almost 5 chapters in the book, and there's some interesting things. It's a lot of it is recapping sort of the history that if you do follow the Habs, or if you're of a certain vintage, like I'll use myself in this case, he sounds like he's probably relatively close to my age.
Yeah.
If not maybe a year or two older or a year or two younger, but I think maybe right around there. And I think, you know, we saw a lot of the same things. And I know the French Canadian side of the whole thing, Grant, and we're here part of Habs Cast and talking about this. And it is important, the identity. There's no doubt about it. It's just, it'll never be what it was. But the fact that they still have to maintain a French presence on the bench, I don't agree with. I think take the best coach available. They threw Marty in there and it's worked out. And so far, here we are in 2025, soon to be 2026. And it's continued to work, going all the way back to Al McNeil, right? He was the guy really. And then Randy Cunneyworth on an interim basis kind of, you know, obviously wasn't going to be there for any length of time. But look at the grief he took just in the brief time he was there. I mean, so there's no doubt. I think it's important to a good segment of the fan base that they have that French connection, not withstanding Perot, Rennie Robert, and Rick Martin, or the great Gene Hackman movie, but they need that French connection in Montreal. There's no question about it. You just can't run a team that way.
No.
You can do what you want behind the scenes. And as I said to Brendan, I did peruse a little bit towards the end of the book just to see, well, how does he put a bow on this and sign off on this? And his reference was basically, geez, I hope we see, you know, Nick and Cole and Yuri and some of the guys say some stuff in French. And then lo and behold, obviously, since he went into post-production and publishing, we've seen Nick take a run at it, right? And do something in French, which I know how important it was. I think I told you, Grant, I emceed Yvan Cournoyer's last 4 or 5 golf tournaments of the 10 that he did.
Yeah.
Jean Beliveau was in the crowd, and I would prepare a paragraph in French that my mother, my late mother, God rest her soul, just passed away a little more than a month ago now, she would help translate for me. And I would go down to Yvonne's and I would read that as best I could. And I'd get a standing ovation. And Jean Beliveau came across the floor and shook my hand and thanked me for trying even
Right.
to read that in French. It meant that much for a guy of his stature at that time. This is 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And he did that. So, you know what? I get it.
Saku, you know, as beloved as Saku Koivu was, you heard grumbling about the fact that he didn't, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, he's Finnish and he learned English, but I mean, obviously that, these European countries, their second language for most of them is English, and
Yeah.
especially hockey players. But the fact that he didn't learn French or try to speak French very often was disappointing to
Yeah.
a lot of Quebecois, and I get it. And just the Doug Wickenheiser, that's the first real example, and we've seen it a lot of. Just as a draftnik, I just want to weigh in on that. The revisionist history, the hindsight that people always get with, oh well, should have picked that guy. There was not one team in the NHL, not one, that would have even slightly considered not picking Doug Wickenheiser first overall
Exactly.
that year. He
Yeah.
was the best prospect in a decade since Lafleur coming out of the draft. It was a no-brainer. He was the guy,
Yeah.
and it didn't work out. You know what? They had LaRouche, Mondu. They had a strong. I think Acton was there. There were
Yeah.
quite a few centers, and you know, Wickenheiser started the year in the press box, and he went
I
from
know.
being a guy that was the best in every sport that he ever played. Brian Murray had a great chat with me about it because he had coached him in Regina,
I
right?
know. I
And
know.
just said that they ruined him. Like it just shattered him. That
No,
he
no question about it. If you lived through that era, and I was, as I said to Brendan, I went to a string of home openers, yeah, consecutively in Montreal. Among those 344 games I attended at the Forum in 21 years, and I was at that game that night. I remember it vividly. I remember sitting there. I remember Wickenheiser being announced as a scratch, and just absolutely so bewildered and distraught over that when Denny Savard went out there and flew around like just like a water bug and ended up being a star in the game, scoring. They beat Montreal the whole 9 yards, right? So it was a terrible, terrible thing. And it started a road for Doug, and God rest his soul. He's been gone for a while now, a few years. But that was just a terrible, terrible thing, and for him and his career. And I do not think for 1 second, had they drafted Denny Savard, it would have been any different. And you would have seen the Yvon Cournoyer scenario 2.0, speaking of Yvon, where he couldn't get a sniff of regular ice time, despite winning the Red Tilson Award, coming off a 64-goal season in junior, lighting it up. I mean, he couldn't get a sniff. Anyway, that was 15 years earlier, but it wasn't all that dissimilar with Lafleur. I mean, they threw him at center. And anyways, we're beating a dead horse here, and we've gone down these roads many times. And I thought Brendan spoke well there, and like you can see the tact. He wants to. It's a French culture thing, clearly, but I get it, and I think it is important. I think it's less important than it was, clearly, because what's on the ice is what's important now, and you're never going to get what it was in terms of French Canadian impactful players and things of that nature. If one comes along, great, we'll see. Maybe Bolduc will win the Conn Smythe next year. Who knows, right? But I mean, it's those days are gone, Grant. But I thought it was a good interview, and I appreciate it.
absolutely.
And I'll tell you what, I'm going to definitely, hopefully, get to Montreal. I told Yvon this the other night. I hope to get down to Montreal before Christmas and get to a game, and I'll message Brendan. If we can go down in old Montreal, find a tavern, and go in and have a couple drinks on a Saturday afternoon before he or I or both of us go to the game, I'd do that. I'd love to.
Yeah, for sure.
I'd love to.
No, sounds like an interesting character for sure. Yeah, when you've interviewed that many people that connected to the team too, you've got some great
I told him that.
stories to
Yeah,
tell. So I'm
he did a
sure.
good job.
Yeah,
Just a little bit that I've seen that he's talked to, there was a good cross section there, and he didn't just do the Memesos and whatnot. He talked to guys like Bob Gainey and Chris Nyland. So I read the Nyland bit today. It's kind of ironic, right? I just spent 5 days with the guy, so here I am reading his quotes in the book. So that's kind of cool. And Memeso was not on this trip. He alluded to it. But Memeso's on our next one. Like when I leave in 2 weeks for Newfoundland and Saskatchewan, and Sergio Momesso and Stefan Richer are going to be on that trip. So, it's all
rural internet again coming
yeah.
up.
We'll probably be screwed and unable to do anything, but we'll take a shot anyway as best we can. But listen, Grant, if you want, you and I can just finish. Really, I got to get going, but I got 10 minutes here if you want to shoot the breeze on Montreal, Ottawa, and what
Sure.
I'll ask you your thoughts first on what you witnessed the other night, which kind of lost in it all was kind of a tidy little win. Dobas hasn't allowed a goal yet in preseason. The Habs are 4-1. They beat Ottawa 5-0. I was pretty happy with that.
Yeah.
And look, everything started with the hit on Newhook. I mean, that's where it all started. And I think 9 times out of 10 Montreal teams in the past, there would have been no response. But I think
Exactly.
Jack Guy and the brothers weighed in there, and what came out of it was a byproduct of the original hit on Newhook. Everything else, yes, there were cheap shots on both sides and some dirty stuff and some fights. And in this particular case, Montreal did very well. They may not next time, who knows? Although they seem to, if they want to, be able to ice a pretty strong lineup. But I don't know. Give me your thoughts on what we saw.
I got thinking, like, when's the last time that Conn Smythe used to say, beat them in the alley or whatever? When was the last time that the Habs iced a team that could beat a team on the ice and in the alley, right? Just they had the most skilled players and they had the toughest players.
You got to go back that far, man. Nyland and Quebec,
you do. They had the most skilled players on the ice, and they went after our stars, and then they had the Canadiens had the tough guys to beat them up. It's been, I couldn't, like you say, you have to go back to the 80s, to Nyland in the 70s or the 80s, right?
Yeah.
When you had games where you had the toughest guys and the most skilled guys on the ice. So things have changed. There's great reason to be excited about this team. Jaden Struble showed that, he can fight,
I wish he'd do more of it. Not to say I want to see him be a goon, but I thought a couple of earlier preseason games when there was some stuff on the ice and he kind of just raced in there and tried to play peacemaker more than really sort of assert himself physically. So I was happy to see that, because I think he's reminds me of a defenseman version of Mike McPhee as a forward. Mike McPhee was very, very deceptive fighter and could really handle himself. I mean, he gave it to Mark Messier one night, and I think that surprised the hell out of Messier. And I see that with Struble. I think you're buckling on with him. You better have your chin strap done up, man. That guy can go.
Oh, he's strong as an ox too, right? And I think what they did was, like, I think Struble, maybe it takes it kind of woke up the sleeping giant there in a sense, where, okay, because what they did, the cheap shots, right? It inflamed these guys, and Struble in particular, and because he was on the ice at the time, right? It happened, and it just, that was it. He flipped a switch on him, and when he loses his temper, we can see we see now what he's capable of, and I think you're going to see more. Like, I asked him, I interviewed him in college, like, he'd never been in a fight on the ice, had never fought. So I think that might, as you win a fight decisively like that, your confidence to do it again in the future goes sky high. So I think look out, your guys better be on their best behavior around Struble in the future, because I think that guy, he can be a real dangerous scrapper.
Well, I guess the irony there, Grant, is that opening night, if we got everybody healthy, Struble's probably not in the lineup.
Yeah, well, I think he's outplayed Jack-Eye personally, but I know we don't agree on that. I have loved Struble this preseason. I think he's been maybe one of their 3 best defensemen, and I don't know how you can't dress him to start, but Jack-Eye's been good too. Both of them deserve to be in the lineup. That's that's a pleasant problem to have.
Well, the good news for them and bad news for Montreal, perhaps, although maybe we're splitting hairs, is that Goulet's out every second week anyway. So,
Well, he may
you know,
not even play. Yeah, it's possible, right?
yeah. So
But
you may have room for both these guys. Well,
yeah,
you will over the course of the season, barring any injuries to them, of course. But
right.
I think they're all hands on deck. Yes, you're right. I'm taking Arbor over Struble opening night if we've got everybody. We'll see what management decides.
Yeah,
They may agree with you and put Struble in, but if we have everybody available, remains to be seen the extent of the groins there for Goulet and
Struble and Hudson. Every time they play together, there's some chemistry there. They really played well last year. Their numbers, their advanced stats were the best of any pairing on the Canadiens last year when they did play together. And
right.
I thought the one preseason game that they were together, easily the best defense pairing on the ice. So, you know, if
It's
Goulet's
gonna be
not,
interesting to see. We're gonna find out very soon
yeah,
what they do. Either way, they're gonna carry 7. I think that's pretty apparent. So, you know, I mean, I suppose if you wanted, depending on what happens up front, injury wise, you could at times go 11-7 in a game if you choose. But so you've got different options. This is great that Montreal has these options,
yeah,
and hopefully it translates into a good start. First things first, we'll get through Saturday night. Right before the interview with Brendan, you flipped me on our communal chat there. Ottawa's recalled half their Belleville roster, it seems,
yeah.
in advance of Saturday's game. Not sure what to make of that. I mean, I know they lost every fight, but it's not sure why. I got a laugh listening to local radio this morning to that all of a sudden Florian Jackeye is the big meanie because at 21 years of age he it's like they're making
Oh
him out to
no,
be like this veteran goon. The guy had 24 goals last year, rookie record, right, in Laval, and he led the league in PIMS. Well, to me, that's a fantastic thing. So he gets into it with Yaremchuk or
Carter.
whatever, and destroys them. And Yaremchuk's had 250 minutes in penalties the last 2 seasons as a junior. Like, is he a choir boy? All of a sudden, is he in a bubble? You got to protect these guys. Hey, man, you're playing big boy hockey. You put your pants on. Guys jumping, you fight back. You lost. Okay, so be it. You ate a few punches. Tough one. But that makes Florian a bad guy for doing that. The guy's trying to make the team. This is one of the things he's going to do. He is going to play regular season games for Montreal this year. I absolutely guarantee you he's going to play. And just like we all said, there's no way Demidov's staying with Laine and Doc. Look at that line already the other night. I can't wait to see that combination again in a game. So that Laine was on. And Doc, look at the improvement from those 2 games. I think you even tweeted that out, Grant, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, I think it was maybe a little bit of a kick in the pants to them and say, hey, you have to earn that spot with Demidov, right?
Yeah.
Because I think everybody would like to play with Demidov.
Well, it just even on paper to me, it just didn't look like the fit. Like, who's to say second line, third line? I mean, it's whatever. What are they going down in ice time?
Right.
I mean, it's an abundance of riches if you got all hands on deck. However, it's an abundance of riches if that translates into points and everything. I'm just giddy really here to wait and see it going, because if we got everybody healthy at least to start, and I know every team would say that, hey, give us health and we've got good rosters here, but I think in Montreal's case, they're really on the cusp here of something special. But in terms of the other night, I mean, it was the hit on Newhook started it all. The rest of it, whatever. The fines were assessed by the league as they saw the cheap shots, and they went appropriately and accordingly against the Ottawa players. Now half of Belleville's been called up. All I know is that Ottawa's got to state who their lineup is on Saturday before Marty will file his. So I guess we'll see what's going to transpire. I don't know if Brady's going to play or not. You have to know if he's playing.
Probably.
fight. And is that a good thing if you're a Senator fan right now in a preseason game? If it's a regular season game, I think you're going, hey, all day, this is part of Brady's makeup. This is going to be a hell of a rivalry, so they're probably going to go. He's going to go somebody. So dress him, obviously, and he's going to fight, probably. But as for Saturday night, I don't know if I would dress Demidov if he's even able to go. I don't even know if I would dress Lane if he's even able to go.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
You know,
will they dress Nick Cousins? Probably.
Will they dress Nick Cousins? I mean, I think that's really probably the key point of it all.
Yeah.
On Saturday night, you hit the nail right on the head, and I'll say my last point on this Montreal Forum today is that's the absolute number one salient point right there is Nick dressing, because he's going to be a target if he does, and then that will bring Ottawa's guys, based on who else they have in the lineup, are going to have to be on high alert, which means here we go again. And we'll see how it plays out, which means Marty and company will have to decide who they want to dress. You're on home ice. You still want to ice a bit of a lineup for your fan. That's the way preseason works. Allegedly, Travis and Marty had a chit chat, right? And said, well, let's both sit out our number one lines. Right?
Okay.
Did you hear that?
No, I didn't hear that, but
that's what I heard. I don't know if it's absolutely true or not, but I did hear that. Coincidentally, both teams sat out their number one lines, but it's great, Grant. We got real hockey right around the corner, and look, it was great getting Brendan on. I wish him luck with the book. Like he said, he wrote it in French. It'll be a big hit, I'm sure, throughout the province and probably elsewhere in the country. It's been translated into English, and I perused it in the last 48 hours. And like I said, there's a lot of regurgitation there, about about the riot. It's been dissected 9,000 times, and it was 70 years ago. The Quiet Revolution and the affiliation with it. I can tell you, Rocket Richard wanted no part of that. Anytime that was ever brought to him publicly, he absolutely downplayed it every time. Said, I'm just a hockey player, not trying to make a political statement here, but by extension, just of who he was in the battle with Campbell. There was a battle, and I do think that was tangible. There was something to it. It did predate the riot by several years when the Rocket wrote a ghost column in the Hockey News. And he was told unceremoniously by Clarence Campbell in the NHL that he had to cease to write it. He couldn't be making those opinions publicly, speaking out against the league as a current player. So they forced him out of that, and just a number of other incidents that were continually brought up by Dick Irvin Sr. and Kenny Reardon, who had got into like the assistant coaching job, assistant GM job, if you will, even before there was really an official title for it. He used to accompany Dick Irvin Sr. To Montreal, to the head offices all the time to see, about the egregious play against the Rocket that was continual, and try and, ask for some better favorable rulings as he was being mugged nightly. And so there was a buildup there that the Montreal fan base used, I think, as a tempest in a teapot to really explode that night of, ironically, St. Patrick's Day 55. 4 days after the incident against Boston, which led to the suspension and everything. So it's all good stuff, buddy. Eh? It's all good stuff, man. When it's the Montreal Canadiens, you've got 120, almost 115 years of history here to talk about. So there's all good stuff.
And the Ottawa Montreal rivalry seems to be. Remember back to the Lars Eller incident and the rivalry that was growing at that point, while not having faced each other, not both being good teams until now. Last year making the playoffs, and again, imagine if they played in the playoffs this year. That'd be so great.
I think the regular season games are going to be, even though sadly, there's only a handful of them. But you're right. That's what fuels it, right? That's what did it with the Ottawa Leaf rivalry is 4 times in 5 years, and you lose every one. And, it built up just an absolute wall of hate for Toronto. And now it was nothing. And then last year, you got it going again. Although, frankly, that was a pretty tame series, really, right? There really wasn't much of anything.
No.
And whereas you look at in 2013, of course, you had the infamous line brawl that went very much Ottawa's way, and they still champion Matt Cassian beating up Colby Armstrong. I guess that was a big deal. And then, you know, in 2015, we've got the microfracture. So it was
Right.
you know, it was always something. But you're right; those are playoff things that really fueled the rivalry, and each team won a series, and now it's been 10 years, so it would be unbelievable if they met again in the playoffs. So, but buddy, we will see how it goes. As far as I'm concerned, I think we had a good Montreal Forum show today, and thank you, Grant, for producing it and jumping on here at the end. And I thank Brendan Kelly again for coming on. I wish him the best of luck with the book. You've been there as well, Grant.
Yeah.
You're also a published author. We all carry that torch, and we've all been there with the anticipation, the excitement of a new book on the market. There's nothing like it. And I wish Brendan all the best. And I enjoyed the conversation. I don't know the guy at all. And I think it would be interesting to sit down and sort of compare some notes with him. So I'm going to take him up on that offer. God willing, as I told Yvonne last night, I'm going to get to Montreal. I'm going to go and see him and Ev there at their home. And I'd like to go down nice and early and do that, and then get in the city. And maybe I love getting in the city nice and early and hopefully get a ticket or a pass for the game and go to the game. So that's on my agenda, but before Christmas for sure.
Sounds good, Liam.
All right, buddy. Well, that's it for me, Grant. On behalf of Grant McCagg, thank you to Brendan Kelly. I'm Liam Maguire. This has been the Montreal Forum. We'll catch you next time. G'day.